Greta Mendel believed in small kindnesses the way some people believed in miracles. In her 32 years, most of them spent in her small Midwestern town, kindness had been her one consistent refuge. It had sustained her through her hardest days and reminded her that, even when the odds seemed insurmountable, a little generosity could keep the world spinning. Greta worked at the Rusty Fork Diner, a modest roadside eatery frequented by truckers, road trippers, and the occasional flock of regulars who came for the hot coffee and warm smiles. Greta wasn't just a waitress here, she was a fixture, the kind of person customers remembered long after their last slice of pie. Her quick wit and sunny disposition made her an unofficial therapist for many, even as her own life was quietly fraying at the edges. Home wasn't much easier. Her mother, Lila, had been battling health issues for years, and the mounting medical bills kept Greta's dreams of something more just out of reach. The house where they lived, a creaky old thing with peeling paint and perpetually clogged gutters, was as weary as its occupants. Greta had patched the roof herself last summer with a tarp and hope, determined to keep the rain out for another year. She didn't complain about her lot in life. Complaining wouldn't change anything, and she took pride in making the best of what she had. As she often reminded herself, kindness doesn't cost a thing, but it sure pays dividends. On this particular Thursday evening, the diner hummed with the comforting chaos of clattering plates, soft conversations, and the distant sizzle of burgers on the griddle. Greta, balancing 2 coffee pots and a tray of pie slices, wove effortlessly between tables. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the scuffed linoleum, a sound so familiar it had become a sort of background music to her days. At table 7, a family sat quietly, a man with a weathered face, a woman whose tired smile couldn't quite hide her worry, and a little girl clutching a stuffed bunny with one floppy ear. They had been there for nearly 20 minutes, their menus untouched as they spoke in hushed tones. Greta approached with her usual cheerful demeanor. "What can I get for you folks tonight?" she asked. The little girl perked up immediately, pointing to the menu with an enthusiasm that made Greta's heart ache. "Can I have the smiley face pancakes, with extra syrup?" "Coming right up," Greta said with a wink, jotting it down. "And for you too." The man glanced at the woman, who gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. "Soup for me," he said finally, his voice tinged with hesitation. "And maybe a grilled cheese for her." "Great choice," Greta said. "I'll make sure it's extra toasty." As she walked away, she couldn't help but glance back. The way the man held the menu like it might crumble in his hands, and the way the woman's fingers worried at her napkin, told Greta everything she needed to know. This wasn't a family out for a casual meal. This was a family at the edge of something, holding on as best they could. When the food arrived, the little girl clapped her hands in delight, diving into her pancakes with gusto. Greta lingered for a moment, watching as the parents quietly divided the grilled cheese and soup between them. They didn't complain, didn't make a fuss. They just seemed grateful for the meal in front of them. When it came time to settle the bill, the man waved Greta over, his face already clouded with apprehension. He fumbled with his wallet, his fingers trembling as he flipped through its contents. Greta could tell there was nothing there, no card, no cash, just an apology waiting to spill from his lips. I think I left my card in the car," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll just go grab it." The woman's hand touched his arm gently. "You didn't bring it, remember?" Her voice broke slightly, and she looked away, as if the act of speaking the words was too heavy to bear. Greta's heart tightened. She had been there too many times to count. She knew the weight of that shame, the way it clung to you like a second skin. Before the man could rise from his seat, Greta slid the check off the table and folded it neatly into her apron pocket. "No worries," she said lightly. "This one's on us." The man blinked at her, stunned. "What?" "No, I can't let you." Greta held up a hand, her smile soft and genuine. "You can. Consider it a welcome gift from the Rusty Fork. Pay it forward when you can." The woman's eyes welled with tears. "That's too generous. It's just a meal, Greta interrupted, her tone kind but firm. And it looks like you've got more important things to worry about. The little girl, oblivious to the tension, looked up at Greta with syrup on her cheeks and said, "Mr. Flopsy says thank you." She held up her bunny for emphasis. Greta chuckled, her chest warming. "You're very welcome, Mr. Flopsy." As the family left, the man paused by the door, turning back to Greta. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You've got a good heart." Greta waved him off, the lump in her throat making it hard to respond. Once they were gone, she retrieved the bill from her pocket and tucked it into the register, ready to cover it from her tips. It wasn't much, just over $20, but in Greta's world, $20 was enough to buy a week's worth of groceries. Still, she didn't regret it for a second. Soft as a marshmallow, Jess, one of her co-workers, teased as she passed by. Greta shrugged, her smile unwavering. Better a marshmallow than a rock. That night, as she locked up the diner and headed home, Greta replayed the little girl's words in her mind. "Mr. Flopsy says thank you." It was a small thing, but it felt like a reminder and nudge from the universe that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. What she didn't realize was that her small act of kindness had set into motion something much bigger than she could have imagined. The next morning, Greta arrived at the Rusty Fork just before sunrise. The familiar clatter of pots and pans greeted her as she tied on her apron and checked the coffee machine. The air outside was crisp, the kind of autumn morning that smelled faintly of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Inside, the diner warmed up quickly, and soon, the first trickle of regulars began to arrive. Greta moved through her morning routine with practiced ease, topping off coffee mugs and flipping through her notepad to keep orders straight. But her mind kept drifting back to the family from the night before. She wondered if they'd managed to make it to wherever they were going. She wondered what had brought them to that moment in the first place. Sometimes it was easier not to think too much about the stories behind the faces, but this time, she couldn't help herself. Midway through her shift, just as the breakfast rush began to taper off, the bell above the door jingled. Greta glanced up, ready to greet the newcomer, but froze when she saw him. The man who entered the diner wasn't the type to blend in. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a suit so sharp it seemed out of place against the backdrop of vinyl booths and faded menus. His polished shoes clicked softly against the tiled floor as he approached the counter. There was a deliberate, confident air about him, but when his eyes met Greta's, they were kind. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and calm. "Are you Ms. Mendel?" Greta blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "That's me," she said cautiously, setting down the coffee pot she'd been holding. "Can I help you?" The man extended a hand. "My name is Victor Hawthorne. I'm the CEO of Hawthorne Industries. I believe you helped some friends of mine last night." Greta hesitated before shaking his hand. "Friends of yours?" Victor nodded. "The family with the little girl and the stuffed bunny. They were on their way to see me." A swirl of emotions passed through Greta. Relief that they had reached their destination, surprise that their story was connected to someone so important, and a flicker of unease as she wondered why he was here now. "They told me what you did for them," Victor continued, his expression softening. "You paid for their meal when they couldn't, no questions asked. They said you showed them kindness when they needed it most." Greta felt her cheeks flush. "It wasn't a big deal," she said, brushing it off. "They looked like they were having a tough night. I just wanted to make it a little easier." Victor smiled, a gesture that transformed his otherwise serious demeanor. "You might not think it was a big deal, but it meant the world to them, and to me." Greta shifted awkwardly, not used to being on the receiving end of such attention. "I'm just glad they're all right." "They're more than all right," Victor said. "And I wanted to come here personally to thank you." Before Greta could respond, Victor reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to her, his expression resolute. Greta opened it cautiously, her breath catching when she saw the check inside. It was made out to her for $1,000. Her eyes widened. I can't accept this. You can, Victor said firmly. And you should. Consider it a gesture of gratitude. But that's not all. Greta stared at him, unsure of what to say. There's more. Victor nodded. I run a community outreach initiative as part of my company's efforts to give back. We're about to launch a new program here in town, and we're looking for someone to manage it. Someone with compassion. Someone who understands what it means to help people without expecting anything in return. Greta blinked, unsure she'd heard him correctly. Me? But I'm just a waitress. Victor chuckled softly. From what I've seen, you're a lot more than that. I can teach you the administrative side of things, but what you already have: empathy, integrity, and a willingness to act when it counts, that's something you can't teach. Greta's mind reeled. The weight of the check in her hand was enough to overwhelm her, but the idea of stepping into a role like the one Victor was describing felt like a step into an entirely different world. I don't know, she said finally. I wouldn't even know where to start. You've already started, Victor replied. The way you treated that family, that's what this program is about. Helping people when they're at their most vulnerable and showing them that someone cares. Greta looked down at the check again, her thoughts racing. The money would be a godsend, enough to pay off some of her mother's medical bills and make their house a little more livable. But the job? That was an opportunity she'd never dared to imagine. I don't have to decide right now, do I? She asked, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. Of course not, Victor said. Take your time. Think about it. And if you're interested, give me a call. He handed her a sleek business card before standing to leave. Whatever you decide, thank you, Ms. Mendel. The world needs more people like you. As Victor walked out, Greta stood frozen in place, the check and business card clutched in her hands. Around her, the diner buzzed with its usual energy, customers chatting and coffee brewing. But for Greta, everything felt suddenly, profoundly still. Her co-worker Jess sidled up next to her, eyes wide. Who was that? Greta could only shake her head, her thoughts too tangled to untangle just yet. But as she tucked the envelope and card into her apron, she felt a tiny, cautious flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The rest of the day at the Rusty Fork passed in a blur for Greta. She moved through her shift on autopilot, pouring coffee and delivering plates with her usual efficiency, but her mind kept drifting back to Victor Hawthorne's visit. His offer replayed in her head, over and over. A manager for a community outreach program? It seemed like something out of a dream, the kind of opportunity she'd read about happening to other people. But could she really step into a role like that? She wasn't sure she even knew what outreach really entailed. And yet, Victor's words stuck with her: you've already started. When Greta got home that evening, her mother was sitting in her usual spot by the window, a ball of yarn in her lap and knitting needles clicking softly. Lila looked up as Greta entered, immediately noticing the tension in her daughter's expression. Long day, she asked. You could say that, Greta replied, setting her bag on the kitchen counter. She hesitated, then pulled out the check and the business card Victor had given her. This happened. Lila squinted at the items in Greta's hands, her face registering surprise as she read the check. Greta, what is this? Did you win the lottery? Not exactly. Greta sat down at the table, the day's events spilling out in a rush. She told her mother about the family from the diner, Victor's visit, and the unexpected offer of a management position. When she finished, Lila sat back in her chair, her knitting forgotten. It sounds like he sees something in you, Greta. I don't know why, Greta said, shaking her head. I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about running a program or managing people. What if I fail? Lila reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. You've been managing more than you realize for years, sweetheart. You've kept this house running when I couldn't. You've juggled work, bills, and taking care of me without ever losing that spark of yours. That's more than most people can say. Greta bit her lip. her mother's words stirring a mix of gratitude and doubt. "But this is so different. It's big, Mom. Bigger than anything I've ever done." "Big doesn't mean impossible," Lila said gently. "You've always put others first, Greta. Maybe it's time to bet on yourself for a change." Later that night, lying in bed, Greta stared at the business card on her nightstand. Victor Hawthorne, CEO. The name carried weight, but it was the possibilities behind it that kept her awake. What if this was her chance to do something more, to step out of survival mode and into a life where she could actually make a difference? The next morning, Greta called the number on the card. "Mr. Hawthorne? It's Greta Mendel. I'd like to talk more about the job." Victor arranged for them to meet at a small coffee shop in town later that afternoon. When Greta arrived, Victor was already seated at a corner table, a tablet open in front of him. He greeted her with the same warm smile he'd shown at the diner, gesturing for her to sit. "Greta, it's good to see you again," he said. "You too," Greta replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I'm interested, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." Victor closed his tablet, giving her his full attention. "What makes you think that?" "Well, for one, I've never done anything like this before," Greta said. "I don't have a degree, or experience, or anything that makes me qualified to run a program." Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're right that there are things you'll need to learn. But qualifications aren't just about what's on paper. What matters most is who you are, and who you are is someone who acts when others hesitate. That's the kind of leadership we need." Greta hesitated, her thoughts spinning. "But what if I don't know how to handle it? What if I mess it all up?" "Then you'll learn," Victor said simply. "And I'll be here to support you every step of the way." This isn't about perfection, Greta. It's about heart. And you've already proven you have that in spades. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord in Greta. She thought of her mother's words the night before, of the family at the diner, and of all the times she'd pushed through doubt to do what needed to be done. Maybe this was one of those times. "All right," she said finally, a small smile breaking through. "I'll give it a shot." Victor's face lit up. "That's all I ask. Welcome aboard, Greta." They spent the rest of the afternoon going over the basics of the program, which was called Pathways Forward. Victor explained that the initiative focused on providing resources like food assistance, job training, and childcare to people in underserved communities. The pilot program would be based out of a newly refurbished community center in town, and Greta would oversee its operations. By the time they parted ways, Greta felt equal parts exhilarated and terrified. She still didn't know if she was truly ready, but for the first time in years she felt like she was stepping into something that could change her life, and maybe even the lives of others. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Greta transitioned out of her role at the Rusty Fork, training an assistant manager to take over her shifts. Mr. Klein, the diner's owner, was sad to see her go but gave her his full support. "You've always had a knack for lifting people up, Greta," he said. "You'll be great at this." When her first day at Pathways Forward finally arrived, Greta stood outside the community center, taking a deep breath. The building was bright and welcoming, its walls painted with colorful murals. Inside, volunteers bustled about, organizing supplies and setting up for the grand opening. Greta stepped inside, ready to begin. Greta's first week at Pathways Forward was nothing short of overwhelming. The community center buzzed with activity, and Greta quickly found herself at the heart of it all. Volunteers greeted her with friendly smiles, but their questions came at her from all directions. "Do we have enough volunteers for the job workshop on Thursday? Who's handling the food delivery schedule next month? What do we do if we run out of diapers during distribution day?" At first, the sheer volume of tasks made her head spin. She spent her evenings poring over spreadsheets and notes, trying to make sense of it all. Every decision felt monumental, every mistake a potential disaster. Still, Greta refused to let the doubts creeping into her mind take hold. Victor checked in regularly, his calm demeanor a steadying force. "Remember, you're not doing this alone," he reminded her. "Rely on your team. You've got good people here who want to help." It took time, but Greta began to find her footing. She learned to delegate tasks and trust the expertise of the volunteers who had been running smaller programs before her arrival. She also discovered her own strengths organizing chaos, connecting with people, and finding creative solutions to unexpected challenges. By the end of the second month, Pathways Forward had already made a noticeable impact. The food pantry was providing meals to dozens of families every week, the childcare center was filled with laughter and tiny feet, and the job training workshops had helped several participants secure employment. One afternoon, as Greta was overseeing a resume writing session, she spotted a familiar face. It was the man from the diner, the father of the little girl with the stuffed bunny. He sat in the back row, a determined expression on his face as he took notes. Greta approached him after the session. "Hi there," she said with a warm smile. "It's good to see you again." The man looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. "Miss Greta, I can't believe you remember us." "Of course I do," Greta replied. "How are you and your family doing?" "We're doing much better," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "My wife found a job a few weeks ago, and I've been coming to these workshops to get back on my feet. We're taking it one step at a time, but it feels like we're finally moving forward." "That's wonderful to hear," Greta said. "I'm so proud of you." The man shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "We wouldn't be here without you. That night at the diner, you gave us hope when we needed it most. I'll never forget that." Greta felt her throat tighten. She had helped so many people since starting at Pathways Forward, but hearing how much that one small act of kindness had meant to this family reminded her why she'd taken this leap in the first place. As the weeks turned into months, Greta continued to pour her heart into Pathways Forward. She built relationships with local businesses to secure funding and resources, organized community events to raise awareness, and even began mentoring volunteers who showed potential as future leaders. Victor remained a constant presence, offering guidance and encouragement. During one of their check-ins, he brought up the idea of expanding the program to other towns in the region. "You've turned this center into a model of success," Victor said. "I think it's time we start thinking bigger. What do you say?" Greta hesitated, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. "That's a lot to take on," she said. "I'm not sure I'm ready." Victor smiled. "You've said that before, and look where you are now. You've got what it takes, Greta. You just need to trust yourself." She thought about his words over the next few days, replaying moments of success and struggle alike. Victor was right, she hadn't felt ready when she started, but she'd risen to the challenge. Maybe it was time to take another leap. At the next board meeting, Greta presented her plan for expansion. She spoke with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed, outlining a vision for Pathways Forward that reached far beyond the borders of their small town. The board approved the plan unanimously. Later that evening, Greta sat on her porch with her mother, a cup of tea warming her hands. Lila beamed with pride as Greta shared the news. "You've come so far, sweetheart," Lila said. "I always knew you had it in you." Greta smiled, feeling the weight of her accomplishment settle alongside a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," she said softly. The road ahead would be challenging, but Greta knew she was ready. This wasn't just a job, it was her purpose, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take her next. The first few months of Pathways Forward's regional expansion brought both triumphs and challenges. Greta found herself traveling to nearby towns, meeting with local leaders, and setting up new community centers. Each location had its own unique needs, and Greta quickly learned the value of adaptability. In one town, unemployment was the primary issue, so the focus shifted to job training and resume workshops. In another, access to fresh food was the greatest challenge, and the center doubled down on organizing community gardens and food pantries. Greta's days were long and demanding, but the tangible results fueled her determination. At the original center, things continued to flourish. Greta had stepped back from its daily operations, trusting her well-trained team to manage it, but she still made time to visit regularly. On one such visit, she was greeted by the little girl with the stuffed bunny, now a few inches taller and holding a drawing she had made. "Miss Greta," the girl called, running up to her with the picture. "This is for you." Greta knelt to take the drawing, her heart melting at the sight. It was a crayon depiction of the community center, surrounded by smiling stick figures. Above it, in blocky letters, the words "Thank you" were written in bright red. "It's beautiful," Greta said, giving the girl a warm hug. "I'll keep it forever." The girl's parents approached, their faces glowing with gratitude. "We've been volunteering here," the father said, "helping with food drives and setting up the new garden. And I just got promoted at work," the mother added. "We're even looking at moving into a bigger place next year. Things are really turning around for us." Greta felt tears prick her eyes. "You've come so far. I'm so proud of all of you." Later that evening, as Greta prepared to leave, she paused to take in the scene around her. Families laughed together, children played in the corner, and volunteers worked tirelessly to pack supplies. This was what she had envisioned when she first accepted Victor's offer: communities coming together, thriving against the odds. As she walked out to her car, Victor pulled up, stepping out with his usual calm demeanor. "Good timing," Greta said, smiling. "I was just thinking about everything we've built here." Victor leaned against the car, his expression proud. "It's impressive. But it's all thanks to you." Greta shook her head. "It's thanks to everyone who believed in it. You, the volunteers, the people who gave it a chance. I just lit the match." Victor chuckled. "Still, you've turned that spark into something extraordinary. And the board agrees." She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "We're taking Pathways Forward National," Victor said, his eyes shining. "You'll lead the charge, of course. The board's already approved funding for the first 10 locations." Greta's breath caught. National expansion? It was the kind of opportunity that could change countless lives, but the weight of it also loomed large. "That's huge," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is," Victor agreed. "But you've proven time and again that you're capable of big things. Take a few days to think about it. But I already know what your answer will be." Greta laughed softly. "You're that sure, huh?" Victor smiled. "I am." The days that followed were a whirlwind of reflection. Greta talked it over with her mother, who once again encouraged her to embrace the challenge. She revisited the centers, speaking with volunteers and participants, drawing inspiration from their stories. By the time she called Victor with her decision, her mind was made up. "Yes," she said simply. "I knew you'd say that," Victor replied, his voice warm. "Let's get to work." The months that followed marked the start of a new chapter in Greta's life. Pathways Forward expanded to cities and towns across the country, each center tailored to the needs of its community. Greta traveled constantly, meeting people from all walks of life and witnessing firsthand the impact of her work. But no matter how far she went, Greta always carried the memories of her small diner and the family she'd helped with a simple meal. They had been the start of something much bigger than she could have imagined. On the 1-year anniversary of Pathways Forward's launch, Greta stood on a stage at the organization's national conference, addressing a room filled with staff, volunteers, and supporters. As she looked out at the crowd, she felt a swell of gratitude and pride. "When I started this journey, I never thought it would lead here," she began. "But what I've learned is that change starts with small acts, moments of kindness that ripple outward. This organization isn't just about helping people survive. It's about showing them that they matter, that they're seen, and that together we can build something better." The applause was thunderous. As Greta stepped down from the stage, Victor was waiting for her, a satisfied grin on his face. "Told you you'd be great at this," he said. Greta laughed. "You were right, but don't get used to hearing me say that." As they walked off together, Greta felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her journey had been anything but easy, but every step had led her here. And she was exactly where she was meant to be.